Hello and welcome to A Deadly Silence. I'm your host, Larry Curtis, and it's the goal of all of us associated with our program to bring you current and educational information surrounding the alcohol and drug addiction crisis, not only in the city of Brockton, but throughout all of our South Shore communities. Today, our guest is John McGahan. John is president and CEO of the Gavin Foundation. John is a licensed alcohol drug counselor. He is a certified addiction and domestic violence counselor, chairman of the board for Action for Brockton Community Development, and vice president of the Mass Recovery Homes Collaborative. John, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to hear. John's been a previous guest on our show, and he has let us know all about the different services that the Gavin Foundation makes available out there in the addiction recovery world, and the tremendous work that has been going on for, what, 30,
over 50 years.
50 years
Yes.
now. You know, one of the areas that we want to talk about tonight is what is taking place with the youth. And when I talk about the youth, I'm talking about the high school, kids who are beginning to experiment, obviously,
Sure.
With the alcohol as well as the drugs, and even into the middle school aspects of, when is the age appropriate or grade appropriate time to start talking about drug education
Sure.
and awareness. So tell us a little bit about what's available from the Gavin Foundation.
Sure. So Gavin Foundation is a lot of youth and young adult transitional age youth programs. The first two that I'll talk about are more intervention type programs. One is we have the Speakers of Hope program, where we go into schools, youth groups, sports teams, etc., to just begin the conversation. And one of the things that we do is we make it age appropriate, so we can do middle school or high school kids. But we talk about goal setting, building support networks, and the first one we do is refusal skills. And we think that it's very important to get into the middle schools, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and to have those discussions.
Now, are these discussions led by clinical professionals, recovering addicts, or?
So what we would do is people that are in recovery that we've trained
Okay.
to do these 3 sessions over and over again. So, for an example, the refusal skills. It might be we'd ask somebody, who's most apt to offer you drugs and alcohol? Well, I can, and let me just back up a step. In our adolescent program, Cushing House, when you ask kids when they first use, for the most part, it wasn't any big plan. It's just something that happened. So one of the things that we do in this is we ask kids, where are you most vulnerable? And then we role play,
Okay.
So if it's at the park, how do you say no? What's the difference between passive, aggressive, assertive? And how do you say no? And how do you offer a replacement activity? So you ask me if I want to go drink beer. No, but let's go to the movies. Or no, let's go to Burger King and get some French fries. Or whatever it is. To be thinking of that replacement activity. So we've got the youth now thinking, where are they most vulnerable? How do they say no? And just keep on moving, to try to get themselves out of that situation. As adults, we may look at a child and think, geez, little Johnny or Janie's got all kinds of support, but we don't know how they feel. So we start with, let's say they're 9th grade. Who might take you for driver's ed?
Okay.
Who might give you a ride to football practice? Who might do these different things? And we have the youth, actually take a circle, put their name in the middle of it, and then we ask them age-appropriate questions. What we find is many times youth that have a lot of support don't realize it until they hear their classmates saying, well, I'd ask this one or I'd ask that one, and it triggers it. So it's a way to help build their self-esteem because they're thinking that they may be thinking they're all alone. The other thing it can do is it will allow the teachers or the people running the various programs or sports programs to see who might need some support because they're lacking that.
Right.
And then the last thing we do is we try to get them to think about goals. And you'd be talking to a freshman class, what's a goal you have? Well, I want to be a doctor. Well, that's a great goal, but if you're in 9th grade, how do we get through this year?
Right.
And what are some things you would do to reward yourself for hitting certain grades or doing certain things, whatever their goal is, to try to keep it realistic and make it achievable for them so that they can feel good about achieving it. So that's the Speakers of Hope program. The other thing that we do is we have a program called Too Good for Drugs. It's an evidence-based practice that we can go into schools and do. It's a 10-week curriculum, and the curriculum is written for the various grades from, grammar school all the way on up so that it is age appropriate. As somebody who's been in this field a long time, I almost think there isn't a time that's too early, as long as it's appropriate and delivered in the right way. So for that program, we have trained people. It's an evidence-based practice, and we stick to the curriculum. And as you know, with the internet and everything else, and how the epidemic of opiate it's everywhere, that we find that we got to get some information into these kids. So those are the two intervention type programs that we do. And then what do you do when you start to sense that kids are using?
What type of cooperation do you sense or do you see out there in relationship to the different school districts you might be working with to incorporate that type of a curriculum or presentation?
Right. So either one of those two, different schools or different sports groups have different takes on it. Some are gung-ho and they want you in there and they want you in there to do everything as often as you're willing to go in and do it. Others don't want to take away from the teacher's time. I always try to make the case, look, these are issues that you're going to deal with. So if you don't deal with them in a preventative way, then you're probably going to deal with one or two kids on the back end in another format. So it would behoove you to let us in there. Yeah. So that's unfortunately we go out and try to get schools to let us do those programs. With the sports programs, some of the sports programs make it part of, before the season starts, before you get your uniform.
Part of their orientation.
Part of the orientation. So that's another way to get it in.
Require the kids and maybe the parents to participate in, and these are the different youth organizations. Could be Little League Baseball, Pop Warner Football, any type of
hockey,
soccer,
arts clubs, all those things.
All those aspects
basketball,
of they're out there. So that the speakers program really helps to introduce and educate the education awareness aspects at a younger.
And there's many times that the youth will not say something that day. They'll say something to a teacher, and then we'll get a call from the school. Hey, we had a student that didn't feel comfortable asking in front of everybody, but has some questions or knows somebody that needs help. How do we get them that help? And we can help them with those resources, whether it be through Gavin Foundation or a local provider near that school.
So you'll work with the local organization, the local school district, to prepare a program that they feel is focused in the educational aspects from that perspective there, and bring in the appropriate speakers from that perspective as well. Let's look at our high school age group. Obviously, peer pressure becomes a huge, hurdle that everyone in the high school has to deal with. What have you seen happen in relationship to a high school student who ultimately maybe becomes involved in drugs? I mean, what type of feedback are you receiving in regards to that?
Well, Gavin Foundation has Cushing House for boys and Cushing House for girls, two adolescent recovery homes, long-term homes to help young people with addiction. What we realized many years ago is that we were sending youth home, they were returning to their typical home school, and then they were calling us right up. My father owned a 2-year business college. It killed me to say to people, you'd be better off getting, your little Johnny a GED, and they're like, they got to get a high school diploma. And it's like, you knew that they didn't have, you couldn't keep them forever, and they didn't have the skills to survive what they were going back to. The chairman of my board, Willie Osterguy, saw this issue through Cushing House, saw it through his full-time job as a Boston EAP. He was the head of the Boston EAP. He fought very hard with legislators, Steve Tolman, Senator Steve Tolman, Representative Brian Wallace, and Representative Martin Walsh, who's now the mayor of Boston, and Lieutenant Governor Kerry Healy, to get funds for recovery high schools here in Boston. I know Brockton's fortunate enough to have one. Boston has one. Beverly, Springfield, and Worcester will be on board. Yeah. And so the idea is to get young people who who are engaged in the recovery process to get them into a supportive environment where they can continue with their education.
So Gavin House has an affiliation with Osterguy, which is the Boston Recovery High School.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about the process of a student in identifying whether there is a substance abuse issue, out there. I've spoken with some school administrators, some guidance counselors over the course of the past year as it relates to the high school recovery high schools that are here. It's here in Brockton. And one of the concerns that I have is that usually it's going to be a behavioral issue that surfaces, as I call it, okay? And typically or statistically, 50-60% of behavioral issues could be the result of substance abuse, But there seems to be no substance abuse evaluation being done. Is that what you find?
So what happens in Boston Public Schools is Boston Public Schools has Jody Eldry heads up the Counseling and Intervention Center. And so what happens is, as part of the code of conduct, if somebody gets expelled from school and they go and they do an intake at the Counseling and Intervention Center, that's part of the intake process is to ask about drugs and alcohol. If there's drugs and alcohol involved in the offense, or the family or the student themselves divulge that there's substance involved, then what they do as part of their suspension is they'll do a structured outpatient addiction program in conjunction with some schoolwork to get them some basic education around substance abuse.
Okay.
Then what we do is we have take them on a field trip to the recovery high school so that they can see it, because you got to remember, you're a young person, you have no idea. So when you're talking about going to a special school, recovery high school, we don't know what they're thinking it is.
Are the parents part of that?
Part of that decision making,
right,
absolutely.
Okay.
And so they can go and see the school and get a feel for what it's like to be at the school. The other thing is we will take counselors from the school once a week and bring them over to talk to the kids, to talk about what the recovery high school is. So there's like a little cross going on there to introduce kids to the concept of the recovery school. So that plays a big part in exposing young people to the recovery high school. The other piece is treatment programs. And in Boston, we're fortunate because of Cushing House and our affiliation, we're a 5-minute bus ride, maybe 8-minute bus ride from our program to the recovery high school. So we obviously have an automatic feeder system to get kids into the school.
So in that type of description, a student's been identified with a substance abuse issue. Determination has been made collaboratively with the school, the parent, and maybe a healthcare provider.
Correct.
That the student can no longer stay in the main community school. So,
right. The recommendation would be: look, you got a substance abuse issue. You've received some substance abuse treatment. Like anything else, do you want to stay on that track, or do you want to go backwards? And which way is more likely to you to meet your end goal, and that's to complete this school year and to get your diploma.
Right.
You know, so there's choices made. The family and the student have to make the ultimate choice. But like you said, a healthcare provider or a substance abuse counselor plays a role in that.
Now, in the case of the Gavin Foundation, you have the facilities where that student, again, depending upon the intensity of their addiction, can enroll into the program, and you can still support them through the Recovery High School in Boston, Osterguy, from that perspective there. That doesn't exist in a lot of areas throughout the Commonwealth. I mean, there are, I think, only a couple of facilities that exist like that.
Yeah, so there's Cushing House in Boston, and Volunteers of America has the Rebound program. Leahy has a program in Danvers, Phoenix Academy in Springfield for the Springfield School, Spectrum in Worcester for the Worcester School, and down on the South Shore there's really not much. There's the there's the Castle program, which is short term, which is can make referrals too, but it's it's not as long a program, so it's not as smooth of a transition
Correct.
as we'd like to say.
Yeah. And do you see these longer-term programs expanding elsewhere in the Commonwealth? I mean, we need one in South Shore, we hope.
I would hope so, but that's a little above my pay grade, but I would most certainly support that.
Got to work with
our legislators.
And our new governor and new Attorney General Mara really out there, behind that.
I have all the faith in the world that they recognize this as a long-term problem. And I remember back in the early 90s testifying before a congressional committee that Congressman Lynch brought here back when, the Oxycontins first hit the street. I said, look, you can treat them now or treat them later, but you're going to have to treat them. And these aren't, this opiate addiction isn't something that somebody's going to grow out of. This is severe, this is deadly. These kids are going to need, if we don't treat them now, they're going to be uneducated, unemployable, with multiple health histories, physical and mental health, and they're going to have kids. So society's going to pay for them. We should make the investment now.
Yeah, continue to drain on the resources.
And forget all the financial investment that it makes sense. These are families. These are people.
Yeah.
We got to do the right thing. Society needs to do the right thing.
And let's talk about society. Society basically thinks the addict is the problem themselves. I mean, nobody forced the addict to put the needle in their arm. That's what you hear consistently out there. But at the same time, society won't recognize the addiction as it would a cancer or diabetes or other health issue out there.
No, you're right. And I mean, you can take diabetes. I mean, if somebody loses, some toes because they didn't follow their regimen, we don't, people feel bad for that, and it's, it's because, they ate cupcakes and, maybe didn't follow their treatment plan, and it's the same thing with addiction, I mean, people don't follow their treatment program and they go back out, they come back in and they get chastised for that. I mean, it's, it's a process like anything else, so you're right.
So let's look at the Recovery High School kind of curriculum that it would be available to a student that is dealing with a substance abuse issue. You had mentioned it's the opportunity for them to continue on with their high school education, to get a diploma, versus a GED or drop out of school,
right.
In addition to receiving clinical services. Who's providing those clinical services during the course of their education aspects?
So at Osterguy, it's Gavin Foundation.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So at Osterguy, it's a three-way collaboration: Boston Public School, Action for Boston Community Development, and Gavin Foundation. Action for Boston Community Development does the administrative piece. Gavin Foundation does the clinical and recovery support piece, and Boston Public Schools does the teachers. And so we all have our role, but we collaborate together to get the job done.
And the ultimate goal is obviously to allow that student to continue on with their educational requirements, as well as receive the clinical support that they need to deal with the addiction aspect. And upon completion of the program, they're graduating with a high school diploma.
Correct. Yes.
Is it a drug high school diploma, or is it a...
No, so actually it's the referring school whose
from the
diploma,
school district?
Yeah,
Okay.
from the school district, and whichever school referred them there, that's where their diploma would come from, so that they're not stigmatized down the road as, Osterguy Recovery High School diploma.
Okay,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
okay, right. When we look at Independence Academy here in Brockton, obviously it's a regional school here for the South Shore, covering, the 4 different counties, Plymouth County, Norfolk County, Bristol County, and I'll forget one, excuse me, like you did. Does Osterguy refer from, is it a regional school as well? And it refers
so
from
that's,
other,
yes. Yeah. So we will have students from Quincy or from Somerville, so yes, we're beyond Boston.
So it's a regional
Arlington,
referral high school.
Exactly.
And parents within that region need to know that
right.
it's how does a parent find that out usually, waiting for an addiction issue to creep up? And
again, that's, it's building relationships with, probation officers, treatment providers. It's, however you can get the word out, and obviously with the various school districts, in your surrounding area, to make sure that they know that it's available, to let them know that the diploma would come from the home school. I think that's important to them because they don't want the dropout numbers either. So so they need to realize that this is a transfer that it's going to come back to you in a positive way.
Exactly. The funding for that student when it's transferred, I understand. Well, the state provides Chapter 70 funding to the different school districts out there. And if that student were to leave its community school to go to a recovery high school,
there's a per capita fee
the
that
per
goes
capita
Right.
transfers with that student during that period of time that they're in the recovery high school.
Yes.
That can be a detriment in the financing of today out there, too.
Well, it can, but I mean, look, let's be realistic. The recovery schools have 50 seats.
Yeah.
If you're pulling from 4 different school districts, that's 12 and a half seats. And how many seats do they have in that school district? So I really don't think that at the end of the day, you can't really say, hey, we chopped your fingers off to help these students.
I'm sure the educators will tell you whatever's in the best interest of the student is what we need to really be focused on. And you said earlier, it's not the financial implication aspect of that.
So I mean, I think that's that's the what we got to look at is helping each individual student achieve their goal, and I believe that has a benefit for the other students who would be in a class with this young man or this young woman, because if they're there and they're not living clean, if they're active in their addiction, I got to assume, I think it's a safe assumption to say that they could be a distraction to other kids or the teacher in that class.
Keeping with the recovery high school aspect and looking at referring districts of students who are dealing with the substance abuse issue, transportation. Obviously, if they're enrolled in your program, you're providing that transportation. Is there any subsidies for families out there that can get that student to that recovery high school, whether they're from Somerville, Cambridge, or wherever?
So I think that there is a bill out there right now. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there is a bill that would help with that.
Okay.
Because we know that is a barrier.
Yeah, it's a hurdle. Yeah, that we see it down here in the South Shore as well. You'd mentioned occupancy. Well, your occupancy issues. Gavin is doing really well. You're a heck of a feeder,
right?
For Oster guy.
Between the work we do at the Counseling and Intervention Center and our residential programs, and we've been in business. We've been providing recovery support services for 50 years. My phone rings off the hook for all kinds of services nonstop. So it's great to have the different services available to us as an agency.
With the last year, Governor Deval Patrick at the time declared the heroin epidemic a public health crisis. Millions of dollars have been allocated into the recovery program. Where do you see the program going in relationship to the young high school kids today?
So I know that the Department of Public Health, as a result of that funding, one of the things that they're doing is they've got some RFIs out for family intervention programs to do the ACRA-ACC, which is a community-based case management and clinical model that's combined to start that. I know that they're doing that in Norfolk County, I think a couple other counties as well. So I think that's for the young people. I know that they're going to add, I believe that they're going to add another school was part of that, another recovery school that would be the one in Worcester.
The Worcester, right.
I also think that there'll be, there was talk of another transitional age youth program that could, I don't want to speak for the state, but I think that that's another piece that they want to capture, because as you know, I'm sure your experience in Brockton isn't much different than ours in Boston. A lot of these kids are maybe a little older and undercredited as well. So I think that not just youth programming, but that transitional age youth that could really benefit from this is important as well. So I think that they're going to address that.
Have you seen within the communities out there, I know you're primarily a Boston organization with some of the surrounding, communities around Boston, but that there is a acceptance and recognition that a drug problem exists within their community? Or do you see the political pushback that, no, we don't have a drug problem?
No, I think every community acknowledges that there's a problem out there now. I think the debate is about whether or not services need to be in that community.
Okay,
is another
the NIMBY syndrome.
Yeah, is another discussion. But I think that we're slowly but surely moving beyond that because of the magnitude of the problem. So I mean. Mayor Koch in Quincy has been fantastic to work with as we've opened up our collaboration with Phoenix for the ATS and CSS in Quincy. I think people are realizing that we need services. You're not going to be able to arrest your way out of this.
No, that's for sure. Absolutely not. And here in Brockton, we got Mayor Carpenter, who has personal experience with his family members in the addiction recovery aspect. Mayor Tom Coate was on the governor's council there down in Taunton.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Brockton and South Boston share the congressman who actually...
Congressman Lynch, absolutely.
Congressman Stephen Lynch, who started Cushing House because of the rash of suicides and overdoses in South Boston. So, Cushing House would not exist without his dedication and leadership.
Right, and leadership, absolutely. We're coming down toward the end of our program. We got probably about a minute left. From the standpoint of parents who are looking for alternative ways of addressing the educational as well as the clinical recovery aspects of a high school student, what would you say to them out there?
I would say advocate for your child. Please don't turn a blind eye to it and think, I know we're running short on time, but I was sitting in a woman's office in a community center, and I had my back to people walking by, and the woman running the center asked somebody, how's your daughter doing? Well, she's just smoking weed. Well, I got to tell you, that to me, it's a yet. I'm not saying that every kid that's smoking weed and drinking alcohol is going to go to opiates, but I can tell you every kid that we've had come into Cushing House started with marijuana and alcohol. So, I don't think we want to take any chances. So if you suspect something, step in, seek treatment services, demand the best you can out of the system. The system's overwhelmed with the need. The need is so great right now, but just stay the course and get the services that you need.
The squeaky wheel gets oiled, as the saying goes.
Yep. The recovery schools are out there. Go to your home school district and say, hey, this is what I want for my child. I think this is best. This is what I'm going to put them in a position to succeed.
I would agree with you 100%. We're out of time. John, I want to thank you very much for taking time to sit with us this evening. On behalf of all of us at A Deadly Silence, thank you, and we'll see you in our next episode.